Hello everyone, my name is Shae Serpell, and today I'm going to discuss how Sarah Churchwell's article titled Secrets and Lies, Plath, Privacy, Publication, and Ted Hughes' Birthday Letters is best understood as an open secret, a volume hesitatingly, uneasily between disclosure and encryption, unsettled by its instability to fix the boundaries between public and private. Specifically, I will discuss this in relation to Sylvia Plath's arguably most famous poem, Daddy, from the Ariel restored edition, and how Hughes attempts to reassert his literary authority through the reconstruction of his image, as portrayed through Plath's poem, Daddy, by the medium of his poems, Picture of Otto, and the shot from his collection, Birthday Letters. Now, Churchwell argues that in Ariel, Plath writes about individual emotional experiences extracted from her life with Hughes, whereas Hughes's Birthday Letters proves to be a more chronological, autobiographical narrative which enables Hughes to construct an ulterior, revised narrative contrasting the truths made by Plath in Ariel. And it's interesting to note, by the way, that Daddy was in fact included in Ariel against Hughes's wishes, as it had been previously published in magazines and was thus already known to the public. So essentially by doing this, Hughes kind of has the final say, seeing as Plath is long dead, with this publication. Through reading Plath's journals, Hughes became aware that he was integral to the narrative of torture that Plath was constructing in writing this work. Now, the stories in Ariel and Birthday Letters are of course intertwined, and by reading both, we're able to try and piece together two seemingly different narratives in order to obtain the full picture, trying to wade through the obvious subjectivity in both. Hughes' goal in writing Birthday Letters, according to Churchwell, is to reassert his identity in the public's eyes. What I want to analyse here is how this battle of truth takes place, particularly over Plath's poem Daddy. So, Churchwell highlights that Birthday Letters insists that Plath committed suicide in order to rejoin her father, who was Otto Plath. He was a professor of biology and German, who died when she was only 8 years old of untreated diabetes. This interpretation is troublesome because it would seem to absolve Hughes of any guilt regarding Plath's suicide. However, Plath's writings in Ariel indicate that his part in her death would seem quite significant, given that her poem Daddy identifies Hughes with Plath's father and angrily rejects both for betraying and abandoning her, referring explicitly to Hughes's affair with Asai Gutman, which, after struggling with mental health issues for a very long time, is what finally broke Plath. In her poem Daddy, we can see from the lines, "I was 10 when they buried you. At 20, I tried to die and get back to you," speaking of Otto Plath's death and Plath's attempted suicide to get back to her father. Then, "I knew what to do. I made a model of you, a man in black with a Mein Kampf look. The vampire who said he was you and drank my blood for a year, 7 years, if you want to know," undoubtedly refers to Hughes, likening her father's Germanic qualities with her husband's and revealing Hughes's likeness to her father, and his figurative draining of the life out of Plath is what destroyed her. However, in Hughes's poem Picture of Otto, once again referring to Otto Plath, Sylvia's father, Hughes writes, "Your ghost, inseparable from my shadow, as long as your daughter's words can stir a candle," which refers to the public's perception of Hughes. "She could hardly tell us apart in the end." This paints a more sympathetic light on the similarities attributed to Hughes and Plath's father. Here, Hughes portrays himself as misidentified with a man that the public feeds on from Plath's writings. Hughes further identifies himself with Plath's father in his poem The Shot, where he says, "Your daddy, the god with the smoking gun." Here he seems to admit the link between himself and her father, which has been immortalized in Plath's writings. In Birthday Letters, Ted Hughes sort of lifts the plot of Sylvia Plath's poem Daddy and offers it as the true story of her death. Now, Churchwell contends that in accepting what he writes as Plath's phantasmatic identification of himself with her father, Hughes can identify in a mediated way with the symbolic authority of the father, but he can also distance himself from that father in order to displace blame on him. So Churchwell emphasises that Hughes' publication of birthday letters may give him the final say as to his version of events, but this does not erase what was already written by Plath and interpreted by her fans. On a quick side note, particularly disturbing, as Churchwell points out, is that even in Plath's suicide, which is the most solitary of acts which she undertook alone, it wasn't really her own, as it's been represented and reinterpreted by Hughes in birthday letters. So ultimately, Churchwell's argument here is that it is irrelevant whether Plath's relationship with Hughes or her father was the catalyst which led Plath to kill herself, and whatever either of the two believe is meaningless, as the overwhelming presence of the Daddy poem in birthday letters can be read intertextually. Daddy gives Hughes his own model for erotics and politics of identification. Birthday letters blames the overarching symbolic patriarch for Plath's suicide, whilst the Daddy we see in Ariel is undeniably rendering Hughes as the reason that resulted in Plath's suicide. Thank you.